Hi all, and welcome to a new video. There is a neighbor of mine mowing, but it sounds super faint in here, so I'm hoping it doesn't pick up on the audio at all. If it does, that is what it is. Today we are going to be covering how to build a list and the tenets of list building and the battle plans and how all that works together to make Star Wars Legion a very interesting game and gives it way more depth than you actually think. We're going to go into a little bit into competitiveness as well, but all of it starts at list building. List building is best approached with the general idea of what you want to do. Something we haven't talked much about yet is the battle plans. Battle plans are your objectives, deployments, and conditions. You use your battle plans if you win the bid, aka you have less points than your opponent's army. You build a deck which includes 4 of each category, so try and build a deck suited for your list. After the deck is built, it is shuffled and dealt onto the table face up in 3 rows, with 1 row for each category. The players then take turns vetoing the leftmost cards until both players have had the opportunity to veto 2 cards. The card from each row in the leftmost position is then used to set that category, objective, deployment, and condition. Now let's go into the cards in more detail. Starting with the battle plan's objectives, we have key position, which is good for a variety of armies. However, it only scores at the end of the game, so build with staying power in mind. And key position has you select terrain pieces, and those count as your objectives. Payload is an escort missions of sorts, sort of like a lot of the payload game modes in online multiplayer games, and is heavily dependent on board setup, and kind of easy to score on as it's hard to move the payload and you can't kill the payload. Recover the Supplies puts 5 objective tokens on the field, and you gain points for each one you control at the end of the game. This card rewards fast early game movement to claim them quickly before the enemy. Sabotage Moisture Evaporators is a defensive heavy game mode and rewards standby heavy armies that want you to approach them. However, as a blue army, you are the defender, so build your list with that in mind. Hostage Exchange rewards fast-moving armies that are good at attacking and or defense, depending on how you approach it. It can also be decided by bounty or other points that contribute to VP, since it is very possible and very easy to tie this. Intercept the Transmission scores at the end of rounds 2 and 4, along with 2 VP for each objective held at the end. This one is a little less hard to swing with bounty missions, and much more rewards constant well-played movement. Bombing Run is unique as you can call in bombs as the game goes on, so faster moving units that can deliver them are rewarded. Breakthrough gives you points for units that are alive and in the enemy's deployment zone. Defensive armies with a fast moving unit type or 2 thrive in this environment. Next up are the deployment zones. Major Offensive has you set up in the corners of the board. Not too bad, but pretty generic. Rollout gives you the ability to have vehicles forward to plane range 1 outside of your deployment zone, which is a bit more unique and rewards more vehicle-heavy lists. The Long March is a split of board sides and one of the worst ways you can play the breakthrough objective point, because it can be annoying, really annoying. I've had bad experiences with it. Hemmed In is an interesting one as it both rewards and hurts the blue player depending on the objective rules. Disarray forces you to split at least 1 unit away from your main force. Danger Close brings you up close to the enemy at the start and can be well used for an aggressive push towards the objective. Advanced Positions gives each of your trooper units Scout 1. Battle Lines gives you each a board edge on the long side, and you can work well to stop the enemy from reaching deployment zones. This is another map that is kind of hard to do breakthrough on, but it's very easy for the blue side to win it too. The conditions are what put the biggest variety in Star Wars Legion. War Weary makes your leader's courage protection range go down by 2 to a minimum of 1. So down by range 2. So if you have something that increases it to range 4 or 5, for instance, it still goes down 2. Limited visibility means you cannot shoot very far, as you cannot perform attacks beyond range 2 on turn 1, and during turn 2, you cannot perform attacks beyond range 3. After that, it's normal, but it can add some survivability to your armies. Hostile Environment works really well if you are a gunline army and the opponent is not, as spreading out those suppression tokens and making it way harder to get them away is amazing. However, depending on the board setup, it can either be a minor annoyance or a major issue. Rapid Reinforcements means starting with the blue player, each player sets aside 1 to 2 friendly non-trooper units, marking each unit with a token. And then when a player draws the token with a rank that matches the friendly set-aside unit, you can choose to put the unit on the battlefield beyond range 2 of all enemy units, and then that unit is activated and sort of token is placed face down. An interesting way to drop troops in, but very situational since you can't do anything after dropping them in. Minefield lets you and your opponent lay out mines on the battlefield, forcing all players to take them into account. Supply Drop gives you the ability to draw special cards that give you the ability to buff your troopers. Clear Conditions has no effect. Fortified Positions has you place 8 barricades across the field within range 1 to 2 of your deployment zones, giving you a crazy amount of defensive ability. Honestly, all these condition cards are interesting and unique, and the combination of each of these 8 sets of cards makes Star Wars Legion games feel unique, fun, and interesting. Now, all of this battle plan breakdown really works best if you're the blue player, so what if you don't care and you want to be a red player? This is best made as an all-around list, and the red player deploys second, vetoes last. You don't win ties unless you have a card that says you do, and being an all-rounder does have drawbacks as well. Running into certain specialized lists gives you trouble. With not enough anti-armor, not enough fast-moving units, maybe units with scout or longer range that the enemy has that you can't counter, can cause you to play a losing game, especially if you don't have a counter to a centerpiece hero that they bring along with them. Know that your opponent is most likely going to have a specialized list, so try and mess it up some in the selection phase. Veto cards that may favor your opponent more into ones that affect you better, especially since you have the last veto. That is a big advantage. Try to build with extra victory point generation in mind to make it so there aren't any ties to break. Bounty units, Padme, R2, anything that gives you extra points is your best friend. There are a lot of game modes that come down to 1 or 2 points being able to be scored the entire game, sometimes only 3. So having the ability to have that extra victory point is amazing and worth it. As a blue player, you are using your battle tech, winning ties, and picking table sides. You have a ton of advantages, however, there are still drawbacks. You have more control over your list, however, if you encounter another specialized list that outbids you, then you can find yourself on the back foot very quickly. This is a part of the reason Blizzard Force dominated for so long, as they could get a reasonably large bid and still be super deadly to most other army types. Try to start with a control character, some centerpiece or buff unit that can turn the tide of the game. Look at your battle deck and try to build something that can take advantage of all of the main objective types. Choose condition cards that can hinder your enemy and make it harder for them to get to you and stop you from doing what you do best. For deployment, pick zones that you think will work with as many objective types you have brought as possible. Try not to pick one that could negatively affect you, although sometimes it's hard to not do that. And that's why your vetoes exist. For all-rounders, don't forget to bring an anti-vehicle weapon or anti-vehicle vehicle weapons, anything. It is always useful to have a counter to vehicles. Expect the enemy to try and get you with a bounty hunter or an R2 in the list. Build a way to counter them in wherever possible. Be willing to cut out units that don't perfectly fit in your plan, and don't be afraid to experiment. Experiment is key to success. And as some final thoughts, list building really is determined by how you want to try and win the bid. Both builds are viable and fun as a blue or red player, and it is recommended to experiment and to get to know the list you end up playing. A lot of people recommend as a blue player bid at least 10, and as a red player try to bid 4 to 9. That way you can beat other red players who just decide to go all in at exactly 800. Practice is what will take you all the way if you want to play competitively. However, if you want to play casually, try to build the list before the deck. Make a themed list that you think you'll enjoy and build the deck around it. Make it workable and playable and make it so you can actually win some. I hope you learned a lot about Star Wars Legion in this video. Really, it's hard to get into the specifics of what each faction should bring in a list. It's why I made the individual faction video, so you can see what each thing does and you can decide what list you want to bring. However, eventually I will get around to making a good, detailed, competitive list on all these factions. That being said, for next week, I'm going to talk more about competitive play with the point changes, all the different nerfs. I just figured we'd go into a little bit of list building and have some fun. It's been a week, and I enjoy making these videos, and it's an amazing stress relief. And I thank all of you for listening to it. It makes me feel really happy to know that there are people out there getting into this game because of my videos. I appreciate all the kind thoughts and everything you guys have done for me. Have a wonderful weekend, all.